If you've ever wondered how birds, bats, and insects evolved to take to the skies, you might be surprised to learn that all these animals actually have something in common. They're all descended from feathered dinosaurs. But wait, if dinosaurs were reptiles, how did they evolve feathers? And how could feathers have evolved so many times independently? Birds aren't the only animals to sport feathers. Take a look at this Ankylosaurus. These ancestors of modern armadillos were covered in feathers too. But what do feathers do? Are they just really itchy scales? To find out, let's design a series of experiments. Hi, I'm here with Minute Earth. In order to figure out what feathers are for, we first need to get down to their very fine structure. Feathers grow from feather follicles, which contain blood vessels and nerves. At the base of each follicle is a pore that secretes oil, which spreads across the feather and keeps it waterproof. But why does this matter? Well, think about all the things living things need to function. They need water, but too much water can also be deadly. All animals have evolved sophisticated systems to control how they gain and lose water. For example, mammals have sweat glands to cool off and release excess water. Fish have scales that prevent them from drying out. And some animals, like camels, store fat in their bodies to conserve water. And feathers are yet another adaptation to help organisms balance water loss and uptake. But feathers do a lot more than just regulate water loss. When researchers examined the texture of fossilized feathers, they found that feathers come in a whole range of shapes and sizes. Some are fluffy and soft, while others are long and pointed, or even hair-like. Some have central shafts with tiny barbs that branch off, while others are made of thin, flat plates. And it turns out that different types of feathers have different functions. For example, some feathers might help an animal keep cool. Those are called down feathers. Down feathers are soft and fluffy and trap air close to the body, insulating it and keeping it warm. Other feathers, including the pointed ones, are great at repelling water. And some feathers might help an animal run faster. We know this because when ostriches lose their feathers, they become slower runners. Still, other feathers seem to help animals maneuver through the air. For example, in pigeons, feathers on the inner part of the wings generate lift, while feathers on the outer part control the direction of flight. Different feathers might also provide different levels of protection. Some feathers are flexible and bend without breaking, which might help protect an animal from predators. And some feathers are stiff and rigid, which might help keep the animal's eggs safe from harm. And it turns out that feathers probably first evolved to fill multiple roles. In other words, feathers may have been an example of what scientists call a multi-purpose exaptation. It's like when humans started using Swiss Army knives. People originally designed Swiss Army knives to do just one thing: open and close a bottle. But over time, people added new tools to serve additional purposes. And now, they're used for everything from fixing headphones to spreading peanut butter. But unlike Swiss Army knives, which were invented by humans, feather exaptations likely happened on their own in nature. And it wasn't just one evolution. Feathers evolved independently more than once in dinosaurs. But why do animals need to fly? Hibernating animals don't fly. Neither do most dinosaurs. So flight doesn't seem to have been a particularly useful adaptation for our feathered friends. But there are some times where it does seem to have come in handy. There's evidence that feathers might have helped early dinosaurs attract mates. After all, peacocks use their big, beautiful feathers to attract their partners, and dinosaurs might have done the same. Feathers might also have been useful for keeping cool. Dinosaur eggs incubated in nests, and the parents might have needed to stay cool to guard them. But probably the biggest advantage of feathers was that they helped early dinosaurs stay dry. This is important because during the Triassic period, when the first dinosaurs evolved, almost all land animals laid eggs. And eggs dry out pretty easily. Having feathers may have allowed dinosaurs to survive in drier climates and eventually take over the world. But when it comes to feathers and dinosaurs, there's a lot that we still don't know. Scientists have found fossilized feathers from more than 100 dinosaur species. But unfortunately, soft tissues like feathers don't often preserve. And that means we don't have a lot of great examples to study. So to learn more about how feathers evolved, we turn to the next best thing in relatives of dinosaurs. By studying modern birds, we can learn more about how feathers evolved and what they were originally used for. So to figure out what feathers originally evolved to do, we can compare modern birds that have more primitive feathers with birds that have more complex feathers. As it turns out, the evolution of feathers seems to have been directly tied to the evolution of flight. Birds that fly more, like hummingbirds, swifts and swallows, have more complex feathers with central shafts and little barbules that interlock to form a smooth surface. And these features likely evolved gradually over time. That's because the oldest known feathers were asymmetrical, meaning one side was longer than the other, which would make them better for steering through the air. And birds that fly long distances today, like albatrosses and terns, have asymmetrical feathers on one wing that are longer on the outside of the wing and shorter on the inside, which helps them soar efficiently. Meanwhile, flightless birds like ostriches and emus have simpler feathers that are symmetrical. In fact, studies show that the more complex the feathers, the more closely related two bird species are. And that means feathers probably didn't originally evolve to attract mates or keep animals cool. After all, flightless birds need to attract mates, and they need to stay cool, but they don't have more complex feathers. Instead, it looks like the evolution of feathers and the evolution of flight were directly tied together. But wait, we said feathers evolved multiple times, but we haven't talked about any other examples besides birds. Well, feathers definitely weren't the first adaptation to evolve for flight. You see, before feathers, animals took to the skies using membrane wings. Membrane wings are folds of skin supported by bony elements, like the webbing you see between your fingers and thumb. And membrane wings worked pretty well. In fact, many animals still use them today, like flying squirrels, who jump from tree to tree using flaps of skin attached to their limbs. But membrane wings aren't great for long-distance flight. That's because they have no way of controlling how fast the air moves over them, so they can't control how they steer. But feathers provided a solution. As we mentioned before, feathers are asymmetrical, which allows them to steer themselves in the air. And it turns out that feathers also give animals unprecedented control over how fast the air moves over them. Unlike membrane wings, feathers have vanes that can change the angle of the feather relative to the body. And these angles affect how fast the air moves over the feather, which affects how much lift the feather generates. And all of these changes happen in less than a second. So animals with feathers had much more control over how they flew. And that meant they could take to the skies over greater distances and at faster speeds. Feathers might have also given animals an advantage in avoiding predators. Flying quickly and changing directions fast helps animals dodge potential predators. And feathers may have also helped animals balance themselves in the air, which makes catching them much more difficult. In fact, researchers have shown that it's harder to catch birds than similarly sized animals without feathers. So feathers might have helped our feathered friends stay safe from getting eaten. In the end, it seems like feathers really did evolve multiple times independently. In other words, feathers are an example of convergent evolution. But why did so many animals independently evolve feathers? Well, remember that feathers served a bunch of different purposes. So it wasn't enough for animals to evolve just one feather like adaptation. They had to evolve multiple adaptations that worked together. And since feathers were such a great adaptation, it's not surprising that animals evolved them more than once. But although feathers might have been an easy adaptation for animals to evolve, it's still hard to believe that feathered dinosaurs eventually gave rise to birds, bats, and insects. If you want to learn more about how animals took to the skies, check out the references. And thanks for watching.